Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thanks for joining us. President Trump and GOP lawmakers are celebrating a major legislative win with the passage of a bill that completely overhauls the U.S. tax system, the first of its kind in more than 30 years.
On this vote, the yeas are 224 and the nays are 201. The motion is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
A very short time ago, the House held a revote on the bill after passing it yesterday to comply with Senate rules. That passed 224 to 201. This after the Senate voted to pass the bill in the middle of the night, 51 to 48. Not one single Democrat voted in favor of the plan. It now heads to the president's desk for his signature.
I think it's a little bit easier to sell that you have more money in your pocket than it is the government's now running the health care system. So we believe this will be something the American people will respond to positively.
Despite that, the individual tax cuts are set to expire after 2025, meaning the majority of middle-class Americans could see increases down the road. Democrats say this proves the bill favors the wealthy and big business.
What has been sold as a middle-class miracle will instead deliver a hefty windfall to the wealthy and only paltry temporary relief for some in the middle class. Others will see an increase right from the get-go.
By the end of the decade, this legislation will provide 83% of the benefits to the top 1% and, incredibly, 60% of the benefits to the top 0.1%, while at the end of the decade, 92 million middle-class households will be paying more in taxes.
The president hit back at criticism that the bill will hurt the middle class this morning, calling it fake news. He says this is a case where the results will speak for themselves.
It's really, above all else, it's a jobs bill because these corporations that are already coming into the country, but they're going to start pouring into the country. It's about jobs, and they're going to build some really great companies and a lot of jobs.
Joining us now from the White House is Zeke Miller. He's an Associated Press White House reporter and a CBSN political contributor. Zeke, Republicans did not have to reach across the aisle for a single Democratic vote here. What are the repercussions of that down the line?
It means they're going to own this for better or for worse. Right now, this is a very unpopular bill in public polling, but Republicans will argue that people don't know what's in it yet, that because there's such last-minute wheeling and dealing, they haven't really invested in selling it to the American people. Whether or not, sort of going into a midterm election, if the American people like what they see, they can actually see the impacts of these tax cuts in their paycheck and they feel the economy booming, that could be a good thing for them. That could save them in what's heading to be a very tough, challenging election year for them. If not, they're going to own all of it. So right. It's an all-in bet for them here on tax reform. So, we'll see how it's too early to really know for sure how it's going to play out for them.
And Republicans are, of course, saying that this benefits the middle class, but individual tax cuts expire at the end of 2025, while those corporate cuts do not. So experts are pointing to that as a sign that this clearly favors the wealthy and corporations. Here's Speaker Ryan addressing that this morning.
They're acknowledging that we're cutting taxes for the middle class, and then because there's a sunset in those tax cuts at the end of the decade, because of Senate rules, they'll go up. Now, we have no intention of allowing that to happen, but it's unfortunate because of these Senate rules that we had to comply with that has that sunset. But Congress has every intention of making sure that that does not happen. This has been done over and over again because of Senate rules, where we don't allow these artificial tax increases to ever occur. But I think to acknowledge that there's an increase down the road is to acknowledge that we're actually cutting people's taxes right now.
Okay, so there we have Speaker Ryan. He can't guarantee taxes won't increase in 2026, but he said Congress wouldn't let these cuts expire. Can he even say that?
He can certainly make that case, but 10 years is a very long time for anyone to predict anything, particularly in Washington. If you look back at the previous, the last tax cuts of the sunset, the Bush tax cuts, those did eventually sunset, though not quite when they were supposed to. They were extended and then not. So there's precedent for this, and And when when the speaker there says that they're trying to comply with Senate rules, those Senate rules are there to prevent sort of legislation being passed under reconciliation to essentially explode the deficit in the out years. So what he is also acknowledging there is himself is that this bill is going to cost a lot of money. The question is, will that money be made up in economic growth? The new revenues coming in. That's what's called dynamic scoring. It's a bit of a budgetary gimmick, but it's sort of if you the dollars and cents right now show that this thing will have some deficit impact, and that's the other admission there by the speaker.
So, Zeke, it's also no secret that Speaker Ryan now wants to address what conservatives call entitlement reform. In 2018, he's spoken a lot about this. So what programs is he looking at, and what is the likelihood of that happening?
Now, we've heard this from the president also in the last few weeks and months. There's talk of doing something with welfare. It's kind of been a conservative sort of effort, going back to the 90s and before. They want to continue to continuously reform those programs. But this, Speaker Ryan also wants to do larger changes to Medicaid and even any other entitlements like Social Security and Medicare. But they're really not. The president is sort of not on board with that. He's been very clear that he doesn't want to really touch entitlement programs. That said, the political will, the appetite for that in a midterm election year, a year where they already want to talk. They need to keep the government open this week, and then probably again in January. They have to work on a DACA fix and potentially tackle broader immigration issues, and then also get to infrastructure. There's really not a lot of time, bandwidth, and in an election year, maybe political capital to do that. It seems like more of a wish than it is a real practical plan for a midterm year.
So that might be somewhere down the road. All right, now, the repeals, this also repeals the Obamacare individual mandate, which requires Americans have health insurance. The Congressional Budget Office says this move will increase premiums, but it also eliminates some of the penalties. What does this mean for the insurance market?
That's sort of the big unknown. There have been a couple of analyses on this in the last few days, and they don't bode well. And this comes in parallel with the Murray Alexander, the Senate effort to try to stabilize the individual insurance marketplaces, which have already been in trouble. Even before the mandate, the requirement, the penalty for people if they don't buy insurance, if they don't carry insurance the entire year, is being lifted in this law. So it could be further destabilizing, creating a crisis, an urgent need for Congress to address health care next year, which, again, not to sound repetitive, but in a midterm year touching anything related to health care will bring back memories of 2010 for Republicans and a very difficult year for them. So there won't be a lot of appetite for that. So it could be a real destabilizing force, potentially, depending on how those markets react, at a time when they don't really have a lot of time to fix it or deal with the effects if they need to next year. Yeah,
they're probably not eager to talk about it, but Mitch McConnell did promise Senator Susan Collins he would include health care fixes in the end of the year spending deal in exchange for her tax vote. So how likely is that to happen?
Well, that's really going to be up to the House. It's this weird dynamic right now where Democrats in Congress just say, let's just pass a clean spending bill, just fund the government, keep the lights on, everyone can go home for the holidays. Republicans in both chambers are sort of trying to treat this a little bit like a Christmas tree, whether it be an emergency supplemental request for hurricane and disaster relief, which is what the House is talking about, whether that be that Murray Alexander, that fix to the Obamacare exchanges in the Senate, and some other issues, immigration that Democrats want. But it's going to come down to a real furious 48 hours of negotiating now with Democrats and Republicans, really Republicans and Republicans between the House and the Senate, what they actually can get done. They haven't been talking a whole lot. They've been really distracted by tax reform in the short term, but then also, they kicked this is a can they kicked 2 weeks ago, yeah. And over the last 2 weeks, they've gotten further apart rather than closer together on a plan for this Friday.
Yeah. So what's going to happen here? I mean, 3 days before funding runs out, where is the White House right now with passing a government spending bill?
Right. And as you say,
well, the White House says they're hoping lawmakers in Congress get them something by Friday. They're optimistic that they'll avoid a shutdown. That it would be political malpractice for them to step on their first big legislative victory with the government shut down a couple of days later. That said, the White House hasn't sort of been front and center in those negotiations, leaving it to lawmakers on Capitol Hill to do that. They are sort of expecting that it will be a 4-week continuing resolution that will get us to about January 19th. But that's, again, what they're hoping for. They're going to start engaging on that a lot in the next hours and the next few days, certainly. But they've been single-mindedly almost focused on tax reform over the last couple of weeks. That was their big legislative accomplishment. They've been hoping Congress can solve this rather than, there hasn't been a whole lot of direct White House engagement on the CR just yet, and that's going to change right now.
Yeah, we'll see how much energy is left there.